All right, so welcome back to yet another online lecture. Today we're going to talk about large language models, which are essentially the foundation behind systems like ChatGPT or Claude. So this is probably one of the most impactful developments in data mining and AI in the last decade. Uh, so this is the outline of the topics that we're going to be covering today. So first, we're going to start by answering the question of what's a language model. We're then going to ask, how do we learn an LLM? And why do transformers changed everything since they came? So how do we go from a language model to a large language model, which is how chat systems like GPT or Claude work nowadays. So we will build on this really on a step-by-step fashion. Okay, so this slide shows us multiple sentences. Um, and so the LLM problem is really about ranking those sentences from the ones that are the most relevant and the most plausible to the less plausible ones. So if I say, Jane went to the store, store to Jane went the, or Jane goed to the store. Um, so a language model assigns some probabilities to each sentence. So a good sentence is probably the one that will have a high probability, while a bad sentence should have the lowest probability in this case. Okay, how do we do so? We compare, we really compare probabilities by of two sentences. So if you compare these two, right? So how are you this evening versus has your house ever been burgled, right? Um, After the how are you this so how are you this evening? Has your house been burgled? Is probably way less probable than just how are you this evening? Well, fine, thanks. How about you? Which has way more higher probability in at mass given a corpus of documents. So the key idea is that language modeling is all about computing the probability of a given text, right? And it does so by some really known assumption. This assumption is known as the chain rule. And so a text, as you might know, as we covered earlier, is a sequence of word. And so we compute the probability of word one, word two, all the way to word n, which are here denoted as x. 1 x 2 all the way xn, and so the idea is that each word depends on the previous words, right? So and this is denoted by a conditional probability, where the probability of x2 is conditional on x1 already happening in the sentence before. So probability of word 3 similarly is the conditional probability is that x3 given that x1 and x2 has already happened in this sentence. So at each step here, we consider the entire vocabulary, which are really a lot, thousands of possible next words, and we compute what is their probability distribution, right? So what's the most probable word after this prefix sentence that we have in here? The students open there, and then we compute a probability across all the words that we might have in the dictionary in this case. So, as you might see, given that we have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands probable vocabulary words that are all valid, the students open their laptop, they might have opened their books, they open their slides, right? There are so many probabilities. And so a model in the language is, you might imagine, is a computationally hard problems because thousands of possible next words are there. And so a language model can generate text. For example, here we can see the students opened, and so for it's essentially like a sentence completion task. The students opened there, which is after the word opened, and that's the most probable word according to their word probabilities distribution over here. And so the key idea is generation, right? So repeated prediction of the next token is what a language model does in this case. So in fact, if you want to combine all what I've just said so far in one slide, the fact that I'm trying to predict was the most probable token, I am implicitly doing the following. I am A language model is acting as a grammar check, right? As a meaning checker, as a style enforcer, right? Stylistic consistency, and also sometimes as a knowledge base. And why it is the case is because it is relying on a corpus of documents which are already being trained on. So a large, millions of documents that it learned from during the training process that are, in the most part, grammatically correct, semantically plausible, stylistically consistent, and have some correct knowledge on the most part, right? So that's why here I had on the in the red sentence that it is kind of difficult to guarantee, because if you train a language model on the whole word web of pages, then there might be some pages, or let's say an outdated Wikipedia page that says that Barack Obama was the 12th president instead of the 44th president. So we cannot guarantee correctness, but on the most part, we say that they are sometimes correct. They have a correct knowledge in this case. Okay, so this slide just shows that those language models are everywhere, right? So I'm pretty sure you're pretty much familiar by now by ChatGPT, Google Translate. If you're using smart devices, then you already know about Siri or Alexa. So this is why we should really care about these models. So applications. So why do we even learn about language models? They have multiple applications, as I mentioned before. So machine translation, right, is one of the applications here. So as you can see here, the probability of strong winds is way higher than the probability of large winds. Who said large winds, right? So large winds might be very rare, if not an obsolete expression. But it might still exist, but the probability of strong wind is higher. So spelling correction, right? So in this case, the probability of about 15 minutes from is should be higher than about 15 minuets from. So we have a typo here in the word minutes. So a spelling correction is an application, direct application of language model. In fact, if you just make a typo in your text, your language model will flag it as a less probable sentence, and therefore there might be some spelling to correct or something wrong, grammatically wrong in your sentence. Speech recognition is another application, and summarization, right? So summarization, it can get a large text and summarize it in few sentences in that case. Okay, so let's talk about the language modeling pipeline. So here, the idea is that we have three boxes in here. The first one is what's the input, and here we train on a very, very large corpus. This could be books, web articles, or journal papers, academic resources, etc. So we have a very large corpus of documents, and so the more data, of course, we're going to have better model, because I think that's the rule of any model by now, or any machine learning model by now. So more data, better model. And so we want to estimate the probabilities from the data. So the steps is that we collect text and we try to maximize the likelihood. So the language model will learn how to maximize the likelihood given a text by trying to extrapolate what's the next token from that given text. Okay, so how do we learn a language model? I think the very naive idea before the neural nets came into the picture is just a counting problem, like we discussed in text mining. So the idea is that we would like to count the word occurrences and then divide them, and kind of normalize them by all the words that we have, all the sentences that we have in our training data, right? So we want to see how many times these words are appearing together. If there is a very high, if they appear most of the times together, then probably that's a high probable sentence from x1 to xn. So this shows here just this slide over here shows the Markov assumption, which we already talked about before. So Markov assumption simply tells you that the next word depends only on the last n minus one words. So here x at t plus one depends mostly on t from the word x one at index one all the way to t, right? So the assumption is here is that it's a memorization problem. So I am memorizing the exact word which appears after this prefix from this sentence, right? And this is kind of a highly simplification of the problem, because there is no this kind of approach lacks generalization, right? And in other words, what I mean by generalization is that by counting or by simply applying this formula over here, by trying to find what's the most probable sentence across a corpus of documents, I am going to give a probability of zero if an unseen sentence is given to us, right? So if a sentence have not been seen in the training set, then the probability of that sentence is going to be zero, although the sentence might make sense, right? So that's where the Markov assumption and the simple naive counting-based language models are kind of failing over here. Okay, so this is just the n-gram probabilities, which we already talked about during the text mining. What is the probability of word I given or conditional on word one all the way to word minus one, I minus one, which is the context sentence before probability before the word I, and so the next word that will be probable is the one which has the highest conditional probability across this context vector over here. Okay, so n-grams in this case counts sequences like I have a and tries to find what's next, right? Or I have a is the context sentence, and the next word is the most probable, which probably is dog. I have a dog as an example. So it predicts the next word using the frequency in this case. Of course, you might imagine that it has high limitations. So there is no long memory, right? No, when I mean long memory is that it relies only on the context window which you have preset. So I'm relying only on the 5 words behind me. I don't rely on the whole text, which gives us more context about the next word in the sentence. So therefore, we say that the main limitation of the non-neural language models, just the n-gram language models and the naive ones, counting-based language model, is that they have no understanding, they lack generalization, and they have no long memory, which is the main red flag over here. So instead of counting, what neural language models tries to attempt to do on the other, on another dimension here is that they try to learn a function, which is here an f. So this is a differentiable function, which is typically a neural network, and that's why they're named as neural language model, from the fact that they're using some neural net inside. So the input here is the words, and it outputs still a probability distribution. Hopefully this function here will learn some patterns instead of memorizing the actual word in the vocabulary. Okay, so before we talk about transformers, which are really the basis and the core models behind all the large language models, let's solve a simpler problems first. So the first question is, how do we combine multiple word vectors into a one meaningful representation? right? So here we're trying to find, so transformers relies on some neural network architecture, and so the whole idea behind them is that they rely on the combination of multiple vector representation of the whole sentence before trying to represent, having a new context representation of each word which takes place in that sentence. So the very first step that I'm showing in this slide is the input, right? So the input, which are the bottom yellow boxes over here, shows a word. Each yellow box is a word vector. For example, the students open their books, right? The students open their books. Every single word has a yellow rectangle in this case. So each word has a vector representation, which is shown in here. So each rectangle might have a representation such as 1.21 minus 0.34 all the way to minus 0.996 in this case. So we have multiple vectors and one per word. Now, the second step is how do we combine them into a one single vector, right? So now I would like to combine them into one single vector. So someone might tell me that what about we use a simple average, right? So um, what about I take the word embedding of this sentence, the word embedding, student opened their books, and then just combine them using an average. So the main limitation of an average function is that it treats all the words equally. Would you agree that in the sentence of the students opened their books, books should have a very high weight than just the word let's say there, or the word the, right? So here, if you just say a simple average, then the word importance is not being taken into consideration. So a better idea of that is to use a weighted average, right? So a weighted average will essentially assign some weights for every single yellow input rectangle over here before taking the product of the weight with the word representation, or the vector embedding of those words. So important words will have high weights, while unimportant words will have lower weights. So this is so where do we get the weight is the next question over here. Right. So this is the center box in the figure, right? So if you see the box over here, this is from where we get the weight. So we need a way to automatically decide about the importance. So if you compare each word to some learned vector that we already have in hand, which is this blue vector that we have here, then we can easily assign the weight with respect to the words and that reference vector that we have in this case. So if you compare each input vector to this blue rectangle over here, we can get a score, and then we can normalize all those words importance via some function such as a softmax function in this case. So that way, as a result, we can have word importances. For example, the students open their books as 0.1, 0.6, 0.2, etc. And hopefully the most important words would get higher weights. So the final output, hopefully, in this case, is a smarter summary of this sentence. So my function f will take the input embedding of all the words in a given text, and it will output a summary of all those texts by taking into account the word weights with respect to a given a reference vector that we have that we already have, right? So an example is the animal did not cross the street because it was tired. As this sentence in this case, if we compute the attention for it, right? The animal did not cross the street because it was tired. So it in this case has a reference to animal, not to the street, right? So therefore, the animal should have a higher weight than the street in that case when you compute the attention and you compute this the scores function for that reference word. Okay, so now some people in class might ask, okay, why not use some sequential models which already exist and does a really good job for other kind of tasks, such as a regression or forecasting. So an example of this in LSTM, right? So an LSTM takes as an input, which is the very bottom row over here. Each yellow box is the words, still the same as the previous slide. And so W1, W2, W3, all the way to WN, LSTM does quite good job in all the sequential data sets, such as images or maybe a time series data. So an example is the students open their books. So every single box will get the vector representation of one single word in this case. So each column, in this case, passes the word representation to the next hidden layer, which is the blue box, which then is waiting for the previous hidden layer to pass down the information from the previous word in that case. So the arrows going from the right in this case shows that the information is being passed from one step to the next one, from one hidden step to the next hidden step. And for me to compute this particular rectangle that I am highlighting, I really need to wait for the previous step, right? So it is not really an efficient process. So in order to get any hidden step from this LSTM three-layer calculation, I will need to wait for all the previous steps, which is the horizontal arrows, and I also need to wait for the computation of the first layer of the LSTM in order to pass down the information, which is this arrow, which is coming from the bottom towards this particular cell over here. So each step really depends on both the current word as well as the previous memory that it has. So the red box that you can have that you're seeing at the very end over here is the last hidden state. So the final state summarizes the whole sentence. But the core problem, as I explained, is that the structure creates some limitations. There's a sequential problem and bottleneck. So you must compute the first hidden layer before the second, before the third, right? So in other terms, no parallelization is possible. And even worse than that, long range dependencies are not captured well. So information from early words must really be processed and travel through many steps, and so the information diffusion gets a little bit far away and gets tired. So the signal is getting lost from earlier tokens and earlier words in the sentence. So signal weakens over time, and it's hard to learn the long dependencies. So if I said something at the very beginning of the sentence, and I'm trying to get the sentence summary, probably the very early information is getting lost. That's what I mean by long range dependency is not well captured. Okay, so now how does transformers do so? So this is the LSTM architecture, and so I'm just going to switch a little bit the arrows and make a whole new topology, a new architecture, neural net architecture, and this is what I call the transformer. So a transformer, if you compare it to the previous slide, it removes this chain effect, right? So it replaces it with a fully connected network. It's very busy over here and very dense. I don't need to wait for any sentence, for any word previous to the current word where I am to finish processing before processing the next the next hidden layer representation of that particular word, right? So every word connects to every other word, right? So if the initial sentence is the students will open their book, so the will connect with all the other word representation in the hidden layers of the other words, similar for all the other tokens or the other words that we have in the sentence. So it is dense connection. So unlike the LSTMs where information is really flowing from one step to another, here every word sees all the other words in an instant way, right? So each line in this case is the attention link, and each word computes the importance for all the other words. So this is exactly like what I showed in this f function over here. So each word in this case, is is connecting with all the other words in the network in the next hidden layer. And in order to compute this blue cell over here, I am just taking the weighted average of the representation of the input words times their scores, which I just computed using the f function in this case, right? So I am getting the aggregated weighted average of all the words with respect to myself. So now all the words will tell me how important they are with respect to my own representation, is what the transformer model is trying to answer in this case. Most importantly, all the tokens are processed in parallel. Unlike the LSTM architecture, where, as you could see, we have so many arrows at the horizontal level and at the vertical level, where I'm waiting for the previous hidden layers. In this architecture, the arrows are going, so every single blue cell can be can be processed independently from all the other cells. I'm not waiting from the previous hidden state in order to compute myself in that case. So each layer builds really a deeper understanding of the sentence. So the first, so in this case, we're talking about one layer of the transformer architecture. There might be way more layers. And so the more layers you add, the more complex the model gets. So for example, the first layer can build just a basic relationship between the tokens or the words. The second layer builds the syntax, while the third layer builds the semantics across the sentence in this case. Okay, so the red box, which is highlighted over here, it shows the representation of one word after being processing, right? So this word now contains information from all the other word. It is a vector representation, of course, but it is an aggregate representation of all those words and with respect to their importance to that given words, right? So that's what the highlighted rectangle means in this case. Okay, so LSTM versus transformer. I really like this slide because it just shows them next to each other, and you can clearly see that from the left, architecture is in the LSTM, which is a sequential model. The right-hand side, we're just looking at the transformer, or also known as a self-attention model in this case. So these two figures or two models, they solve the exact same problem, and so. But they're completely different, right? So the left side here, LLCM is sequential, while the right side can be parallelized, which is a very big step forward in terms of model architecture. Left in the LSTM, we are talking about a weak memory. Because the earlier information gets, as I mentioned, weaker and it gets diluted. So if I mention something at the very early of the sentence, the model forgets it because it's getting passed from one step to another. It is really like I am telling someone in class an information, but that I am relying on that person to tell it to another student, to another student, and to another student. Maybe the information is getting distorted at the end of the process, right? While on the transformer architecture on the right hand side, this is kind of like a broadcasting fashion where the information is being passed towards all the tokens, and hopefully my function f will find the correct the as some weights which are according to that particular word that is being that I'm trying to find the representation of at every single step. Okay, so the next slide over here is so the transformers again. So what kind of function can take in a variable number of inputs like that? So I think we did not discuss the fact that a function, right? So in the LSTM, of course, it's not a problem because every token is passed down as a one single vector which has the same dimensionality. We did not mention that for the case of transformers, right? Here, the dimensionality might be different. Sometimes I have a sentence of like 10, another sentence might be of length 5. And so, as you could see, those blue rectangles might have might get different inputs every single time. So which is a problem because dimensionality should be the same across when we are training our model. If you're training an LSTM, then the size of the images should be the same, while the size of the vector should be a fixed length size. So the input length changes every single time, and so therefore we need to take into consideration this function, which can perform that kind of aggregation with a variable length sentence that we might have. So the first guess, if I ask this question, is what about we take just the an average of all the inputs, right? So if you take the average and you aggregate it, then it's okay, right? I can have an average of 10 numbers or an average of 10 vectors or the average of 20 vectors. It doesn't matter. It will always go give me a vector of the same dimensionality. Now, the problem is that it will treat all the words similarly, right? If I take my function as being an average, it's a problem because, as I mentioned, the words which are not important will have exactly the same the same weight. So we should really compute weighted combinations of all those input words. So that way we're really truly understanding which words matter more for each representation of that particular word. So the idea is that a learned weighted average over the inputs is what we call what you're going to later call as the attention, right? The attention mechanism is all about importance, weighting and giving importance to different tokens in this case. So so I think the next slide here is how can we compute this attention, right? So we said attention is a weighted average, right? So now let's see how can we compute those weights. So if you look at the left side in this case, so these are the input tokens from all the sentences that I'm training my transformer with. So each purple box in this case is a word vector. So x1, x2, x3. This could be like the dog is in the street, for example. So the middle boxes here are the computed attention. So these small colored boxes are the weights, also known as attention. When I say weights, you should also understand attention. So these are alpha 1, alpha 2, all the way to alpha n in this case. So how are these weights being computed? So that's the dotted arrows from the top gray box that you should see here. So this is a vector. This is the reference vector that I was talking about when I introduced my function f, right? So with respect to this vector, over here, we compare each input to this learned query vector that we have over here, and so the intuition is this comparison will answer questions of how relevant is this word, and does it match what we are looking for, right? So and the way we compare this gray token with the purple tokens is using a dot product. We already mentioned that a dot product will give us an idea about similarities between the vectors. So after getting the dot product of this reference token or this reference vector with every single purple input vector that we have here, we get what is the attention, which is these squares, which are in this case a heat map of their importance. So multiplying the input vectors with their relevant or with their actual attention or their scores in this case will give us a new vector in this case. And so if you take a weighted average across all these new purple vectors that we have here, then you're getting a new representation here. All the weighted vectors are being added and you get one single vector representation. So this is an example of how a simple attention mechanism is computed across using a parameter vector, which is the gray vector that we have over here. Okay, so let's just have a simple summary over here about the attention mechanism, the pros and cons. So the main advantage here is that we now have a function that works for any number of words, right? So it solves the variable length input problem that I talked about. So a sentence might be of different length that I can train my transformer model with. It doesn't matter. I can compute the score and aggregate it using a weighted average function here. The second main advantage here is that we can compute this largely in a parallel way. So unlike the LSTMs, where I have to wait for the previous hidden layer, for the previous hidden state, and to compute in order to compute the current state, this whole process can be parallelizable. So every single hidden state here can be computed in different GPUs. That's not an issue anymore. And the model learns really what matters, right? So there is no signal weakening or the long range the long range dependencies are well captured in this case because the signal does not weaken across from one state to another as we're moving on from one layer to another one of the LSTM. Now, the main advantage is that this attention mechanism, as I showed in the previous slide and in this slide as well, it produces only one single vector, right? So this vector is just a summary of the whole sentence. So this is just like summarizing a whole paragraph into one vector. But what really to understand is for every single word, I need a vector representation, not a summary of the whole sentence is needed in this case, right? Uh, so my next slide here asks the fundamental question of what if instead of comparing each vector of the sequence to a single learned vector, we compare the sequence to itself, right? So to make this work, we really need a structured way for words to interact. So how can we answer this question here? So there is a systematic way to answer this question in order to get a new representation or a context or a new text representation of for every single word as it moves throughout the transformer network over here. And this is known as the QKV vector representations of all of every single word that you have in your sentence. So now let's just imagine that the same word, all the words that you have in your corpus are having three different representations: query, key, and value. And those representations are of the same word, but they are each used for a different purpose in the attention mechanism. So for each word, we create three different versions of itself. The Q matrix, which you see here, and of course it has different dimensions, which is the number of attention head and the dimension of each attention head over here. So essentially, it's a matrix representation of that particular word. And so Q is answering the question of what am I looking for, right? So it is used to search among other words about what that word is looking for, right? For example, the word it in a sentence, it is looking for what is the relevance of that particular word. So it is it relevant to the dog or is it relevant to the street, right? So the dog is walking in the street. It is a sad dog, right? So the word it, the QWERTY representation of the word it is looking for probably what's the relevance among the other words. K is the key, and it is a matrix representation of the same word. And it asks the question, what do I contain? It's like the label or the description of a given word, so that other words can match it with itself. And V, lastly, the value, is the matrix representation of the word, and it answers the question of what information do I provide? Uh, it's the content of the word. So this is what gets combined to form the output in that case. So if I were to simplify this in layman's term, right? So the query is your search. For example, I might Google what's the best restaurant in Logan. The key is the web page or the titles or the descriptions of that restaurant. And finally, the value is the actual web page content. Right. So the key is that the title and just the description of the page, but the value is what is inside of the page of that restaurant that I'm looking for in that case. Okay, so how do they interact? Is the next question. So typically, every single word takes its query, right, which is Q. It compares it with all the keys of the other words to measure their similarity. How does it do so? It computes some scores, similarity scores, in order to know how well the query matches the keys of the other words in the sentence. And then, of course, there is some normalization process, which we're not going to zoom in further, which essentially just converts those scores into some weights. And then it uses not the key, but it uses the value v in order to combine the course, in order to combine all the relevant words together in order to form the new representation of that word, right? So it produces a new representation of that word, which in this slide is shown at the very last square or rectangle over here. So the new text representation of the word is nothing but if you take the dot product of query times the keys of all the other words, right? Um, and after finding the relevant words, which have higher dot product, I'm taking their actual values, their corresponding values, in that case, in order to form my new representation by taking their value of the words that are only relevant to myself, right? So it is a filtering process using my key and using my query and the keys of all the other words in the sentence. I'm taking the values of only the ones that receive the highest dot product when I was searching for my the response to my query. So the new vector representation at the very end of the process is known as a context-aware representation because I took into consideration and I gave so much attention to only the words that are relevant to my query. Okay. So this slide just is just another slide which shows that this whole process is very much efficient and parallelizable. As you might imagine, this whole process, the query key and value computations can be done in parallel. So it's possible to do those operations regardless of what's the query, the value representations of all the other or the context representation of all the other words that are in the same sentence in this case. Okay, so lastly, this is thankfully the last slide, right? Every time you see a transformer layer, the first thing it does is it computes the query, key, and value, and then applies the attention towards the next in order to compute the context vector, which is the new text representation with respect to all the other keys of the other words that are in the same sentence. So Q, K, V are computed inside of the self-attention block of each transformer layer. So this is right after the input embedding and before producing the new representation. So this is where the the queries dot product with the keys of all the other input words are being ranked in order to get their values passed down to the correct to the next layer in that case. So this is known as a self attention over here is really the key component of transformers in this case. Okay, so why is this powerful? Because it captures long-range relationship. It is fully parallelizable. It can work for any sentence length, and this is why transformers really replaced LSTMs and RNNs. So if you understood this idea, then you really understood the core of modern AI models, such as ChatGPT and other large language models. Perfect. All right. So if you have any questions, please let me know and have fun with your handout. Thank you.